Hello, bonsoir, and welcome back to the Get French Football News Show. After a summer of rest and relaxation, it's time to get back into the swing of things. And what better way to do that than giving you the most comprehensive preview of the upcoming 2017-18 Ligue season. I'm your host, Nathan Staples, and while there'll be a variety of guests popping in to cover all 20 French top-flight teams, our one consistent will be our very own Eric Devin. So we will start straight away with a team that tends to take up all the headlines in Ligue, especially this summer, and that's Paris Saint-Germain, Eric. Dani Alves has joined from Juventus, but there's one other Brazilian that's been on the horizon that may eclipse that of the whole window, in fact, really. So I want to start with that. Do PSG guarantee themselves a title should they sign Neymar?
I think the title's already been guaranteed prior to signing Neymar. I think that his signing is more of a statement of intent in terms of their European ambitions, in terms of the club writ large. I think that by showing that they can sign Neymar, they're showing that step up in quality of player to really sign a world-class player. And don't get me wrong, the signs of a player like a Di Maria, Ibrahimovic, I think that those players, Thiago Silva, I think those players are at the very highest echelons of their positions, but they're not Neymar, who's a top 5 world player. I mean, we can debate whether he's better than Suarez or what have you, but he's certainly in that group that's just below Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. And I think that even with the fee, I think that it makes a big statement for PSG to say this is the kind of player we want to get. Price is no object. We're going into this with both feet. In terms of the title, I think that given the uncertainties that Monaco are going to face, given the squad depth of the likes of Nice and their own current European competitions, and I don't think that PSG will have any trouble winning the title. I think that there are certainly some intriguing packages that could make the race for the Champions League difficult, but I would be very surprised if PSG didn't win the title by a large margin. Maybe not the 30 points of 2 seasons ago, but I certainly would expect to have them wrapped up for the last few match days. I just think that he's a signing that is a big statement of intent. The interesting thing, though, is how this is gonna play out tactically. It's surprising to me to see. I mean, Neymar, you can't refuse in terms of if you have the opportunity to get him. I think you should, especially given his age and his ability. But the club did just spend quite a bit of money for a player in Julian Draxler, who plays the same position. So it seems like there still needs to be a little bit of coherence in terms of the club strategy. I think that the players they brought in Dani Alves and Yuri Berchicha, do give the team the depth that they need, but I think perhaps they should have thought a little bit harder about a player who can be, say, a backup to Cavani. Now, with Jean-Kevin Augustin having left, there is no recognized striker behind Cavani. And were the Uruguayan to get hurt, I think that could give PSG a lot of trouble. So it's an interesting start to PSG's window, and this deal does look like it's going to go through, but I think that perhaps flogging a Draxler or some other player and bringing in a striker is another thing that they're going to need if they do really want to live up to those ambitions in the Champions League. And the important thing to remember here also is that PSG aren't seeded in the Champions League, having not won. They could be in a group with the likes of, say, Spurs and Real Madrid, or Juventus and Napoli is a third seed as well. Obviously, they wouldn't play with both Juventus and Napoli in the group. But there are certainly a lot of dangerous teams, and not having won the title could potentially make that group stage quite a bit tougher for PSG. So it's going to be a challenging first few months for them, but I think that Neymar is a really intriguing start to the season. Signing of Neymar is a really intriguing start to the season, and I think really brings into sharper focus the role of Emery in getting this team to progress in the Champions League.
Yeah, and I wrote in our preview for the Trophée de Champion that occurred on Saturday that really that was a display where, although they clearly didn't play in the end in Di Maria and Lucas, but those two plus Draxler, that's 3 players that they have in wide positions. And with Neymar coming in and you expect them probably to stay with that 4-3-3 that the players pushed for last season. They're fitting. Someone has to go, and two of those are at least on the cusp of world-class players. And I did think whether they might change to a 4-2-3-1 and play Draxler in a more central attacking midfield position where he performed at Schalke quite often, but not so much at Wolfsburg. Whether that might be something they go to, I don't know, especially with the format where they played on the Trophy de Champion with Pastore in that midfield, well, on the left, but he practically played as a centre attacking midfielder for most of that game. It was a strange formation with Dani Alves further forward as well. But I want to stick back to Neymar for a moment, Eric, and we did mention this on Twitter together a couple of days ago. Obviously, signing him will be a big statement of intent, but it's a lot of money that will swallow up their entire budget. Is that a little bit of a worry with other areas still maybe needing a little bit of strengthening?
No, I think you have saleable assets. I mean, let's not forget Pastore either. They really have 4 wide players. There's also Hatem Ben Arfa, Marco Verratti had been rumored to go earlier in the summer. I think there are certainly options that PSG can have to sell players. They're going to sell one of their right backs. I can't see them starting the season with all 3 of Meunier, Alves, and Serge Aurier available at right back. I don't think Dani Alves playing on the right of a 4-3-3. An attack is something sustainable. Di Maria was obviously suspended on Saturday and wasn't an option. So I think there are sales to be made. So if PSG feel they need to say strengthen in January, I think there are options there for players to be sold. I don't think it's going to hamstring them to quite that extent. And also, the other thing we have to realize too is how much age plays into this. PSG have been linked with Ronaldo in the past. And while I think that have been an impressive move, you know, as someone who's 32 years old, I don't think that the sustainability of Ronaldo would have been problematic, I should say. I mean, this is the thing with PSG. It's been a rare occurrence that they've brought in players who looked to have a potential sell-on fee. Verratti is an example of that. Perhaps Kurzawa, perhaps Serge Aurier, perhaps Marquinhos. But by and large, a lot of the players they brought in have been already in their late 20s, already in their 30s. And the potential money they could reap from selling them on is non-existent. Now, Neymar is still young enough that he could play 4 or 5 years for PSG, and the club could still recoup some of that fee down the road. So from that perspective as well, I see this as being a really good thing. But I think that PSG aren't limiting themselves too much. There are options for players to be sold. And of course, given the vast resources that the club have, there's also less of a problem from that angle. So I think that it just remains to be seen how this team line up tactically. You know, the other player that I think some had mentioned being sold is Lucas, but it does appear that because of his closeness to Neymar, he probably would be more likely to be retained over a Draxler, over a Di Maria, being that he is Brazilian and a good friend of Neymar's as well.
Always something to keep in mind. And getting a 25-year-old, it just maybe is he starting to peak. Someone who could be a generation-defining talent. It might take a lot of money, but you can't really turn down that kind of thing. And it's exciting times in Ligue if that does happen, so long as Barcelona don't tattletale too much at UEFA. But let's keep those fingers crossed at least. We'll move on to your club now, Eric, and that's Lyon. And it's been a bit of a season of upheaval in the summer. They've lost Lacazette, obviously, to Arsenal. Corentin Tolisso has headed to Bayern Munich. A couple more players, Valbuena, Mamana, have all left. What do you think to the overhaul of this squad? Have they maybe let too many go out of the door this summer?
I think that in terms of letting players out the door, the fees that they've received for Tolisso, for Lacazette in particular, are not fees that they could ignore. I think that they did very well to get maximum dollar out of those players. This is not something new. We've seen Jean-Michel Aulas do this in the past, the likes of Benzema and Essien, really get fees that kind of surprised a lot of people in terms of the numbers attached to these players. But yeah, the team is in a tough position right now. I think that a lot, for me, is going to depend on Nabil Fekir. This player in 2014-15 was basically dominating Ligue 1. Even in the France squad, Didier Deschamps had basically built the team around him before he was injured. They had tried an experimental sort of a diamond in that match in which he was injured. He had an ACL that kept him out for all of the 15-16 season. But that level of potential, I think we had seen. We've seen that. Sorry, from Fekir, and if he can come close to recapturing that, I think this team will be all right. But I think that they're going to have to wait another year to get back into the Champions League at this point. There's a lot of intriguing players they brought in. I really like the looks of Bertrand Traore. Marçal, who played last season at Guingamp, has looked really bright going forward in the early stages. Marcelo, the center back from Besiktas, looks a good upgrade on whether it's Nkulu or whoever, Yanga and Biwa, whoever you want to say is dropping to the bench. I think Marcelo looks a potent partner to Diakabi. I think that the right back they brought in from Ajax, Kenny Tet, looks a good upgrade on Christophe Jallet. One of my favorite players, but again, someone who's 34 this year. How much longer is he a realistic option at right back, especially given his recent injury history? So I think that the team have put themselves in an interesting place, but there's just simply a lot of question marks. I think that the deficiencies that Lyon have had in recent seasons in defense and in wide areas last season as well, I think that Lacazette's goal scoring abilities really masked a lot of weaknesses on this side. And it's going to take a player like Fekir or maybe Memphis to step up to make this team be the team that knocked out Roma and that looked fairly decent in the Champions League. They had a very tough group, obviously, with Juventus and Sevilla. But to be on that level again, I think that some of these players that have been in the team for a while, Maxwell Cornet is another one, are going to have to really take a step up and become something approaching the talent that they've hoped for. I do question the departure of Mamana, though. We were just talking about this before we went on air, if you will. And this is a player that moved to Zenit St. Petersburg today for a reported 60 million euro. Lyon did make a profit on the player, something to the tune of 7 million euro. But the question for me is that Mamana was someone who I'd earmarked as someone that because of his ability on the ball and his range of passing, could potentially step forward into defensive midfield. In preseason, Lyon have lined up with a 4-2-3-1. And I think that with Toussaint and Sergi Darder, Lucas Toussaint and Sergi Darder playing in that central midfield area, but were one of those players to be hurt, I think you'd be looking at Jordan Ferry playing in that central midfield role. And Ferry was an important player in 2014-15, hasn't played as much since. But I think if you're relying on Jordan Ferry to be, in the case of injury to one of those two, I think that you have a real potential for being in trouble. I really would have liked to have seen, again, the window's not closed. I really would have liked to have seen Lyon bring in an orthodox defensive midfielder to replace Maxime Gonalon. They may still. Obviously, we've got a whole month left to the window, and Lyon are still, very much in the black in terms of their transfer balance. So that could still happen. There are a lot of good options in Ligue 1. I'd like to see perhaps Valentin Rongier from Nantes is a young central midfield player who I like quite a bit. And there's other options as well, but there are still a lot of questions around this team. I think it's exciting as a fan to see the team sort of turning over a new leaf. They got well to extract the values they did from Tolisso and Lacazette, but I still think I'd like to see them spend another 20 or 25 billion to bring in a couple more players just to round this team out. An orthodox striker as well. I mean, the team really lacked that at the moment in time. They loaned out Mateta, who's very high thought of, but very young. Fekir could be an orthodox striker, the same thing for Cornet. But I think given their lack of experience in that role, especially if the team are playing a 4-2-3-1, I would be a little bit worried about not having the defined focal point that we would perhaps like to see. There are a lot of young players coming through as well. Hassan Aouar in particular is one that I would keep an eye on, but it's going to be a tough season to start out for Bruno Genesio, and I think that we need to look at how these young players develop. Otherwise, Lyon could potentially find themselves out of Europe, especially if Lille and Marseille kick on like some people think that they will.
I just wanted to ask you as well, we've mentioned obviously the big transfers, but Matteo Valbuena is headed to Fenerbahce. You've mentioned Gonalon as well, who's headed to Roma, and Jallet obviously to Nice. Those three, plus possibly Lacazette as well. Is there maybe a leadership void opening up as well at the club where we've mentioned a lot of young players coming in and a lot of young players coming through the ranks? Is there maybe a gap there where someone of those kind of experiences like a Valbuena, like a Gonalon might be missed this season?
You would think that on paper, but I really feel that Luka Toussaint is ready to take that step up. I know he's very young, but I believe he's 20. I think that he's ready to take that step up. I think this is a player who is going to be an important player for Lyon, a leader for Lyon, and I think that he also has the potential to take that talent, take that ability to the national team as well in the next few years. Probably not next summer in the World Cup, but I think come, say, the 2020 European Championships, I think we're going to see him as a regular for Les Bleus. And I think we're really looking at a hugely talented player, both in terms of his intangibles and his abilities on the pitch. I don't think that Lyon will struggle too much in that way. There are other players who have been there for a long time too. I don't think we should underestimate Anthony Lopez, the goalkeeper. He's also very vocal on the pitch. And there are plenty of teams who have done well with goalkeepers as a captain as well. So it's not that Lopez is the captain, but I don't think that that's a handicap either. I know that there are some who would have it that, you know, the captain, the leader should be an outfield player. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think that Lyon will be just fine in that regard. They've never seemed to suffer in years past. I know Gonalon has been a constant, but it did seem last year that he was starting to badly lose his form. And I think along with that, there was something of a mental block for him in terms of his leadership. All the best to him at Roma, but I think that I don't think that Lyon will suffer too much in what appears on paper to be a void of leadership, if you will.
My last question then leads to someone that we've questioned a number of times last season and a little bit to the end of the season before, and that's Bruno Genesio. I know there's been a number of sales of high-profile players, but there's been a couple of decent signings they've made and a couple of decent outlays as well. What's the pressure like on him this season? If say, like you mentioned earlier, if Lyon drop out of Europe, can he really realistically stay on?
No, I mean, I've never been that much of a fan of him. I appreciate what he did with the team down the back end of the 15-16 season, catching Monaco and getting second place. That was well done. But I think that he proved last season, and rather decisively, that his lack of consistency tactically, his use of certain players, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. I think that perhaps that might be a part, for example, of why Lyon have been a little bit more reticent in the transfer market, in that this is a manager who, you know, how much influence he has in the transfer market is another story. But why Lyon are perhaps a little bit loath to really open the checkbook is that they're not sure how attractive they might be to certain players, and they also aren't sure whether, you know, quote unquote, giving certain players to Genesio is the best way forward. So I think it remains to be seen, and I think that's probably it. Genesio commented about a week and a half ago that winning the Europa League is Lyon's ambition this year. So it'll be interesting to see how that's managed in the league. Again, with the likes of Marseille and Lille being newly moneyed, Bordeaux, I don't think are going anywhere. I think that Lyon are going to have much more of a struggle to remain in European contention in the league this season. So that focus on the Europa League, which is going to have plenty of strong teams, high Arsenal fans this year, is going to make that really difficult. So I think that Genesio has a chance to maintain his status, but he's going to be on borrowed time to start the season, and beyond that, I think it's going to be really tough.
That sounds like you're hoping for a Lacazette reunion sooner rather than later, for the sounds of things, at least. Let's move on to a club who's had a really interesting summer, and we didn't expect much less from them, really, with the new money. And that's Marseille. They've had a whole list of new additions, really, to the squad. Valère Germain, Luis Gustavo, Steve Mondonda has returned, Adil Rami as well, and they've looked like they're going to integrate Lucas Ocampos now he's returned on loan as well. What do you think to this new look squad, really, Eric? A number of them are maybe on the older side, you might say, in the terms of Rami and Mondonda, but there's some really interesting players added to this group, isn't there?
Yeah, and let's not forget that Florian Thauvin has been tied down to a permanent deal, and Clinton Ng as well. I like these moves. I think that Marseille, even with their defensive frailties last season, got into Europe. They won the first leg of their Europa League playoff tie 4-2. They're in decent position to go through there. Their return leg will obviously be this Thursday. I think this team is looking good. I think that I would have liked another left back. I don't think that a combination of Henri Berimo and Patrice Evra is of a caliber to get you to the Champions League places in Ligue 1. But again, there's still time. There's still time to advance on that. But I think that the rest of the team, more or less, is decent. My gut reaction, I've talked with our regular correspondent, Muhammad Ali, about this, is that some of these players just being a little bit older, and for Rami, it's not even age, it's just he's a very slow-footed player. I worry that Marseille, in taking this tack of bringing these established veteran players, are making themselves a cut-rate PSG. Now, PSG are only sustainable because of the fact that they have these deep pockets as a result of the Qatari investment. Now, Marseille have investment in the form of Frank McCourt, but let's face it, McCourt's not operating on the same financial level as the Qataris are. So bringing in players that have a little sell-on value and are a little bit older doesn't seem to me to make a whole lot of sense. I mentioned this last season when they had bought Payet, that the quality and variety of players, younger players, that could be developed a la Monaco in Ligue 1 is so high and so impressive that it just doesn't make any sense to bring in a player like Rami when you've already got an old defense in the form of Rolando and Rad Fani and Thomas Hubachan, these sorts of players. It just really baffles me that you spend that sort of money. I know there are younger players. Doria looks like he's going to stay with the team. Ocampos as well. Hiroki Sakai is 26, 27. So it's not that the team itself is totally old, but I'd rather see more of a focus being placed on younger players. I know they did bring in Morgan Sanson. Maxime Lopez looked good coming up last year. But there's still, for me, a lot of questions about this. I understand that if success is the immediate mandate, that veteran players are more attractive. But how that looks in 3 or 4 years when these players are 33, 34, 35 is kind of another story. I also would probably like to see the team bring in another striker. I know Germain scored a hat-trick on Thursday, but if Marseille are in Europe, they need another recognized striker. I don't think that player is Clinton Angie, and I definitely don't think that player is Remy Cabella, who has played as a false nine at times when Gomis was injured. I am kind of surprised they didn't keep Gomis. I think that, I know he's kind of the butt of jokes, he's slow, but the guy scored 20 goals last season in the league. I think that speaks for itself, that Marseille could rely on a somewhat shaky defense. But if Germain goes down with injuries, now he's not had any major histories of injuries in his career, so knock on wood, he stays fit. But it's a real question, what Marseille do with that lack of depth at center forward, especially playing that 4-3-3, where that center forward is such an important focal point. I know Thauvin can score goals. I know Payet can score goals. But just with how shaky that defense is, it could improve. I know I'm not ruling that out, but it's very dicey for me. Even in their friendlies, I watched a couple of them. Seeing how they were done in by balls over the top really made me nervous. I think that this team is putting itself in a very risky position. I mean, yeah, they scored 4 goals against Ostende in the Europa League, but they also conceded 2. Against better teams, that's just simply not going to be good enough. And I worry that with all the young talent in France, to spend the 40 million that they have this offseason so far, that could have been much better invested domestically. I like the move from Andanda. I like the permanent signing of Thauvin, and I like Germain. He's a useful player as well. But it's just I just don't agree with the overarching strategy that McCourt and his team have taken to this point in time. We've written ad nauseum about the quality of young players. Now, obviously, prices are going up. The money that Rennes paid for Sarr, the money that was paid for Nicolas Pepe, that boggles the mind. Sarr is an incredible talent, but Pepe, I don't get that. I think that there's more of a premium on French talent at this point in time, but still, if you look at those prices that are being paid, I think that Marseille could have got better value and more diversity for their money.
Yeah, and I agree. The amount of young players that they could have at least had a go for, it seems. It doesn't seem like they've really stretched themselves enough. I'm looking at like you mentioned, centre-backs was a real issue last season, and it doesn't look too positive this with friendly performances, and they conceded 2 in that the Europa League game, even though they did end up winning 3-2. I don't understand why they didn't try for someone like Issa Diop. It might be a bit expensive, but he looks like an exciting player. No bids for Yoris Gnagnon. He's an exciting centre-back at Rennes. Even Christophe Julien at Toulouse, he's a little bit older, but he's only about 24 now. He's a really solid style of defender. I don't know why they've not tried to push the boat out on some of these. And some of the young signings, like you've mentioned, that have gone through. Sarr, Mawassa as well, who left Nancy. He would have been easy to get as well. Possible left back if they needed to as well, like you mentioned with Ever and Bedimo really having to cover those positions. It, like you say, it all screams to me of short-termism, of trying to get into those, try and push themselves into those Champions League spots. I think they've possibly done this because of, like we've already mentioned, the potential weaknesses of Lyon at the moment, and with Monaco losing quite a few players and maybe in a bit of transition themselves, maybe going for those more experienced players might gel a little bit quicker. But it's a tough one to tell. Do you really think, Eric, that they could push for the Champions League this season?
I think if things go well, yes. These players, again, have experience at a certain level, Rami, Gustavo, in European play. And I think that, again, there's just so many questions about every other team in the league, bar PSG, that who knows? Who knows how Bielsa will get his Lille team into shape. Nice and Monaco are undergoing major reconstructions, as is Lyon. And Bordeaux are relatively consistent, but, haven't brought a whole lot of depth in the window. We're going to speak with Robin about that in a few minutes. But again, Saint-Etienne, I don't think are going to improve. I think there's a lot of questions about how Oscar Garcia is going to shape that team defensively. I think their signing of Diony is exciting, but we look at all the teams that have been in contention for Europe. There's Rennes as well, spending a lot of money. And can any of them, trot out an 11 that has the quality in each position, again, save left back, putting age aside, as Marseille? I don't think so. And that midfield too, a midfield of Sanson, Gustavo, and Lopez, that's one of the better midfields in Ligue 1. I would argue that Monaco and PSG certainly have definitively better midfields at this point in time, but bar that, probably not. And if they can bring in another striker to allow Germain to be used in different matches. I know Moussa Dembélé from Celtic's been linked as well. So there's some exciting players being linked, but I think that another striker, could very, very easily put them into that Champions League bracket this season, just given the amount of questions that surround all the other contenders for those sides, for those spots rather.
It'll cost them a lot to get Dembele, and they've been linked with a number of players. Giroud was another one that was named, but I can't really see that happening. And there's been plenty of names floated around there that get Marseille fans all excited and bits like that. But I don't know. I don't think they can overcome those defensive frailties unless they sign another couple, I think. Like you mentioned, there's worries at left back. I'm still very worried about centre back, even though Adil Rami is a solid player, but they relied a little bit too much on Pele last season. And Mondonda having pretty much a season out of football at Crystal Palace. He barely played. I just worry about them too much defensively. Are they going to have enough firepower to outscore teams every week? Are they going to really push the boundaries there? I don't know. Like you mentioned, it depends more on the teams around them than their own performances, I think, of whether they'll really challenge for those Champions League spots, really. But Eric, let's move on to another team that was really surprising last season for a brief period, but really sunk in the second half of the season, and that's Guingamp. They've had a relatively intriguing window. They've lost a few players, but Marcus Thuram is a potential real prospect in the attacking areas. Can they push on from a good start to last season, or are you worried that they might continue what happened at the second half, or at least the start of 2017?
Honestly, for me, I think that this team had its opportunity last season in terms of being a European, finishing those European places. I really was positive on Guingamp through that first half of the season, but they really went on a downward spiral. And now all those players, I mean, obviously there are younger, exciting players with the team at this point in time, but I think that the likes of a Jimmy Briand, the likes of their center backs, losing Marcel, I just don't see this team taking a step up, unfortunately. And I love Antoine Camboire as a developer of young talent, but I don't see Guingamp being able to take the step up. I mean, they've also let even a player like Bassama Sanko, who went to Caen, I think that he's not a world beater, but just that level of depth that he brings, I think that we have to look at Guingamp as being somewhat suspect in terms of depth. I mean, the players they have brought in, I think that are somewhat intriguing. I think that Kamara from Derby, who was at Angers previously, is interesting. But beyond that, beyond Thuram, who you rightly mentioned, I think is an intriguing prospect. They haven't really brought in a whole lot of players, and even another player like Neil DePaul, not a world beater, but again, someone who's versatile and can add needed depth to that team. Right now, we're looking at one of the older squads in Ligue, and that's not something that's been changed. So I think it remains to be seen. There's some younger players that have been brought in, Felix Aboa from PSG, but I don't know. I just can't see a team that's another year older, like some Mustafa Diallo, Luka Doe, really kicking on, especially with the improvements that, again, the likes of Lille and Marseille have made. I really just don't see it.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, another player that really had a successful season last season is Jimmy Briand, and whether you can keep pulling that out of him as he gets older and older, it's unlikely when you start taking the weapons away from him. I bet they're pretty pleased to keep Saliba for at least the time being. I know there's still a couple of clubs linked with a move for him, and he had a good shot. I think he had a good finish at least to the end of last season. But like you mentioned, it seems to be they've cut sort of the depth out of from underneath that first team, that they've sort of, let's say, trimmed the edges, might be the best way of putting it, of that squad. And you start to worry now that if they do have an injury to someone in those attacking areas, someone as important as Briand or Saliba, then who do you replace them with? DePaul's gone. He was a regular substitute, like you mentioned. Mondi's gone to Bordeaux as well. He came on in their Champions League game. He's another striker that they're going to maybe miss on. It all depends on maybe someone like Thuram stepping up to the plate, and that's a risk, isn't it, Eric? Especially in this league where we've mentioned before that the middle table seems a little bit muddled this season, and a couple of mistakes can drop you quite far, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, there are positives for Guingamp. I don't want to be totally negative. I mean, Nico Benazet struggled for a lot of the season with injury. If he can regain fitness, I think he's a really intriguing player. And you rightly mentioned Thuram. He's a French youth international. I think that he can potentially give something. But again, he's a player who's 19 years old. I think that, again, Camboire is a good steward of young talent, but I don't think we've really seen these younger players kick on in quite the way we'd want. Marcus Coco, I think, flattered to deceive a lot of the times. And I'd say something fairly similar about Blah. He didn't seem to really have a position. He's played on the right wing and central midfield on the left. There's just too many questions about this Guingamp team. And yeah, I think relegation could be, a real worry if one of those center backs, Sorbonne and Kerbrat, again, another year older for both of them, if one of them has a long-term injury, I do really worry about the ability of this team to maintain a solid defensive base and give attacking consistency. Luka Doe could play in central defense. I know he played there for Nantes a little bit 3 or 4 seasons ago when he was with them, but there's just too many questions about this side's depth. And we saw injuries were a big concern down the back end of last season. You had Ikoko hurt, you had Marçal hurt, you had Jonathan Pereira hurt, and we saw Guingamp, really struggle with that lack of depth. And I don't think that the current summer has done anything to alleviate those concerns. And that's the bottom line. If anything, it's made it worse. So again, a couple more injuries, and Guingamp could be once again, struggling to avoid relegation.
It could be a worrisome season for them indeed. We move on and invite our first guest of the evening, and that's French football writer Robin Bear. Now, welcome to the show, Robin.
Hi guys, how are you?
Very good, thank you. We're gonna start with the champions, and that's Monaco, and they've had a bit of an interesting summer, at least trying to fend off the crazy amount of interest for their players. They've lost Bernardo Silva very early on. Benjamin Mendy's left, as well as Timu Bakayoko. There's a few extra additions like Yuri Tielemans and Terence Kongolo as well, who both started the Trophée des Champions on Saturday, Robin. How do you see them setting up this season? Are they still contenders for the title?
I think after what they achieved last year, I think you have to consider them as potential title winners. Obviously, they've lost 2 or 3 big players, but they've been planning for that for a while. They said at the start of the summer that their whole ethos this summer was to possibly lose 2 or 3 players, but to try and replace them with younger players. And it seems like they've done that. Obviously, Tielemans is probably one of the highest rated young players in Europe at the moment. He's still got a margin of progression. We saw on Saturday night that he can be a very effective player for them, and it'll be interesting to see how he develops. I think they'll struggle to match the quality of PSG over the course of the season. But then I think most people would have said that at the start of last season as well, and look at what happened to them. I guess they're possibly in a sort of a bit of a transitional state now, but I don't see them selling any more players at all. And I think what they've got now is pretty much how they're going to set up for the whole of the season.
Yeah, it looks like they're going to stand firm at the moment. But we mentioned that game on Saturday, and especially in that first half, there was a lot of positive signs, really, especially from the likes of new lads like Tielemans and Kongolo was at least decent. Do you think that Leonardo Jardim can stick with that 4-4-2 with the players he's brought in, or maybe he might have to switch things around during this season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think he was helped very much last year by the fact that 4-4-2 was so effective for them for such a long period of the season. And obviously, I would say Benjamin Mendy had a huge role to play in that because he was so effective going forward from left back. I guess it remains to be seen whether Terence Kongolo can be quite as effective as that this time around. And if he's not, which is doubtful to be honest, then he may need to look and assess his options. He does have a little bit of depth in his team, of course. He had João Moutinho on the bench on Saturday, so he's quite a good option to be able to bring into the midfield. But I think going forward, I think the 4-4-2 works quite well because Falcao links so well with Kylian Mbappe, and I think that's going to be something that they'll really try and maintain over the course of the season.
Eric,
sorry. I had written a piece for The Guardian about how Monaco can move forward, and I had advocated perhaps a diamond 4-4-2 with Lamar behind the strikers. What do you think about that? That would give Tielemans and Moutinho in central midfield with Fabinho behind them. Yeah,
that would certainly be an interesting possibility, and that could be one of the ways they go forward. However, that formation is very, very reliant on the fullbacks being able to provide width. So, they might have been more effectively at doing that if Mendy was still at the club. But obviously, Djibril Sidibe is on a very, very effective attacking threat, as we saw on Saturday with his goal. And it does look like Jardim's going to really encourage the fullbacks to push forward again this season. So, yeah, I mean, it could be something that they look at over the course of the campaign.
What about Jorge, the young Brazilian that was brought in last January? You think he's ready to take a step up, or you prefer to see Kongolo at this point in time?
I've not really seen too much of Jorge, I have to admit. From what I understand, he's possibly a more attacking player, and I think possibly in certain situations that may well suit Monaco better. So Kongolo might offer a bit more solidarity. Apparently, from what I've heard, Jorge is a little bit weak defensively. So it may well be that in perhaps the bigger games, so matches like against Paris Saint-Germain, maybe Lyon, Marseille, Lille, they look to be a bit more solid and play Kongolo. And maybe against the weaker teams, they might look at having Jorge play.
Might be a couple of interesting prospects to have here, because I've seen Congolo play as a centre-back, so they might even try a back three at some point with if Jorge's more of a attacking left-back and try something a little bit different. But I wanted to bring back to someone who has moved on, and we're all a little bit disappointed, at least, that Bernardo Silva is no longer gracing Ligue 1 with his wonderful presence. Is he probably the most difficult player for them to replace, Robin, given his specific tool set?
Yeah, I think so. He was so effective for them. I mean, it's not very often that you see a player who's quite as technically gifted as that come into Ligue 1 and be so industrious and be so such an asset for the entire team, not just going forward but defensively too. You know, there aren't too many players in world football with his technical abilities, and I think that the aspect of the whole move that disappointed me most was that Monaco didn't get more for him. I certainly think they could have ramped up his transfer fee a little bit by another 10 or 15 million, particularly when you see the prices they got for Mendy and Bakayoko. I just can't see him being able to be replaced. I like Ronnie Lopez, but I just don't think he's a player he's certainly not yet in the same class as Bernardo Silva.
No, and looking at Alan Saint-Maximin, who came on as well at the weekend, he doesn't quite fit that mould yet. And it's a shame that Boschilia is still out as well, injured. He might be someone else that they might look to fill that void. But we've briefly mentioned him in that the young midfielder, Yuri Tielemans, who'll be the replacement really for Bakayoko. What did you make to his first game? He looked pretty assured in that position and a decent partner for Fabinho as sort of a deep line playmaker.
Yeah, I mean, he's not obviously not quite as physically robust at the moment as Bakayoko with Monaco, but he does look very technically assured. I've seen him play a little bit for Anderlecht, of course, in the Champions League, and you know he's a guy that's never really looked out of his depth. Although he has been introduced quite slowly into first team football comparatively, I think. You know, there's been comparative to his hype anyway. He's obviously been around for a few years now, but he's not always been a starter for Anderlecht, and he's a guy who's really seems to mature, and he looks very accomplished in there. Technically, he was very solid. He obviously picked the pass for Djibril Sidibe's goal, and he certainly didn't look as though he was a player who's just been introduced into the team, and particularly such a young player who's just been introduced into the team.
Just to finish our chat of Monaco off, Eric, I want to get you involved in this as well, and I'll go to you first. Monaco have obviously brought in a lot of young players in the past, and that's been the core of their real model of getting success. Is there anyone in particular you're really excited about this season?
I think Mami Touré. This is a player who I've been very high on, even going back to when he made that surprise start against Arsenal in the Champions League a couple seasons ago. I think that if we are to see this, if Jardim does not have the confidence to play Ronnie Lopez on a regular basis on the right side of that 4-4-2, and that is Sidibe, who plays on the right wing, if you will. I think we're going to see in Mami Touré a player who could potentially be, one of the best right backs in Ligue 1. I know that's a big shout. I know that we look at the quality of a Serge Aurier or Dani Alves, but I really think that Touré is ready to take that step up. He's a really complete player in terms of his defensive capabilities. He's not quite as dynamic as Sidibe going forward, but he's very quick. He doesn't have the crossing ability of Sidibe either on the right, but I think that Touré is very quick, very dynamic, very physically powerful. We saw him play at center back on an occasion last season against City in the Champions League. He came on and played center back, but I really think that this is a very, very impressive young player, and I think that we could be talking about him in the same financial breath as a Mendy, as a Silva, as a Bakayoko come next summer. If he kicks on the way I think he will.
Robin, who should we keep our eyes on?
I quite like the shout of Mami Touré, to be honest. I know Eric wasn't quite so hot on his attacking capabilities, but he's actually a very, very good crosser, and I think he got a crazy number of assists considering the number of minutes he played last season. I think he got maybe 5 or 6 assists tonight. He only played comparatively a handful of minutes, so yeah, that's a good shout. I'm quite interested to see the young man from Barcelona who's come into the team, Jordi Mbula. I've heard very big things about him. It might be a little bit longer, maybe not this season that we really see the best of him, but maybe in 2 or 3 years' time. He's apparently a very, very exciting player. We've already mentioned Tielemans. And actually, I quite like the look of a guy who's gone out on loan, Irvin Cardona. He's gone to Cercle Bruges on loan, and I would have quite liked to have seen him, because from the snapshots I saw of him last season, I think he looked like he could have been an effective player who could have been, quite an interesting backup for them to have, particularly given that they've allowed Saint-Germain to go, so they might be a little bit light up front. Another guy, Alan Saint-Maximin, again, we've mentioned him. If he can mature and become a more intelligent player, I guess he's got all the technical abilities to really become exceptionally exciting on the wing. But unless he can really screw his head together, I think he's possibly going to be one of these players that we refer to as what if in the future.
Yeah, I wanted to get, I don't know, St. Maximin, I think that's an interesting one. I think that Bastia was the wrong move for him last season. Not having that, he's an incredibly talented player, but being asked to do so much in that Bastia system when there weren't any other players that were creative on the ball, say maybe, a 36-year-old Gael Danic, I think that really, I think has and could potentially even further hinder his development. He's been around for a while, but at Tielemans, like, he's 20 years old, but I don't know. I feel like that, not being able to work within a team ethos like the best sides require, being just given a run of the pitch at Bastia, I think has really stunted his development in terms of his ability to be a team player. This is, I think, someone who we should have seen more from at this point in the French international youth sides, but we really haven't. I think that speaks volumes about what his abilities on the pitch are versus his abilities to play within a given system.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good takes there, and I'm looking forward to Bushilia coming back as well. He was really excellent when he did play last season, and I think we should all keep an eye on this younger 18-year-old striker they've got up front as well. He seems like he might be an interesting player in the years to come. We'll move on now to Bordeaux, who had an excellent 2017 and have got off to a good start in the Europa League qualifiers as well, Robin. But that means they are competing on two fronts, at least for now, this season. Have they done enough really in the transfer market in terms of depth to try and really compete for both competitions, at least in a competent kind of way? I mean, they've brought in a few little players, but there's nothing groundbreaking. What do you think to their summer?
No, I mean, I would have to agree with you there. I've been quite surprised that Bordeaux haven't been more active in the transfer window, to be honest. We've seen them sign Jovanovic and Savali, who were already on their books at the end of last season on loan. They've just confirmed their place in the squad. Obviously, Benoit Costil, who's a very experienced keeper in Ligue 1, he's arrived. But I don't see him as a massive upgrade on Cedric Carasso, to be honest. And I believe they've also signed Alexandre Mendy from Guingamp, who's he's not the sort of player that I would have instantly thought of being a sort of Bordeaux standard striker. For me, I know he's still young, but he's still a bit clumsy. He looks sort of gangly on the ball, and I don't think he's a particular adept finisher. And their final signings, a midfielder called Lucas Lerage, who's come from Belgian football, and I have to admit I've not seen him play at all, so I don't know anything about him. And for me, it was surprising to see some of the players have let go. Obviously, Adam Munas is gone. The money that Napoli were paying for him, they couldn't really refuse, particularly, excuse me, after he had really quite an average season by what Jocelyn Gourvenec would have hoped last year. Nicolas Palwa, who was always a solid defender. Even Frederick Gilbert had an excellent season at Caen on loan. And Enzo Crivelli, who similarly was excellent on loan at Bastia. I think he could have done a better job than Mendy in their team. So I've been surprised by their transfer window as a whole. I don't think it's been particularly successful. I'm not convinced the squad's any better than it was last season, and therefore I think it follows that I don't think they can compete effectively on two fronts. Yeah,
and I watched Lerage in that game in the Europa League at least, and I don't quite understand what they expected from him, really. I think they left Valentin Varda on the bench as well for that game, and it seemed a strange decision to leave out the Argentine that did so well last season, at least in the last couple of games as well. But Talking about some of their attacking players, at least anyway, they started the likes of Francois Camano and Malcolm in that game on Thursday night. Are those two players really key for them this season going forward, especially like you mentioned, Unas going, Crivelli as a striker going as well? They need those two to be more as productive as they were last season, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. And both Malcolm and Camano were excellent in the second half of the season. You know, it obviously took Camano a few months to settle in Bordeaux, but once he settled, he was really one of the stars of the second half of the season, certainly for Bordeaux. You know, if you look at their other attacking options, Gaëtan Labor's probably a reasonable striker. Diego Roland doesn't really seem to want to be at the club, so who knows what's going to happen with him before the end of August. And obviously Tom Aturi, who could be a huge player for them, but obviously suffered this serious muscular injury last year, and it's going to be interesting to see how he bounces back. So I think on paper there's a little bit of depth there, particularly out wide, but just a little bit now. But there's so much pressure on Malcolm and Camano, and both are young players. It's going to be difficult to see how they can produce what they produced in the second half of last season on a regular basis. If they do, there's certainly no chance of both of them being here if we speak again in 12 months' time.
Eric, what do you think to this team? I mean, they did have a really excellent end to 2017. Can they really still push for Europe this season?
Looking at a couple weeks ago, I would have been more optimistic. But now, letting Palois go, and it seems like giving Toulalan the place of priority to play next to Levchuk or next to Jovanovic in that center of defense really gives me a lot of worries about their midfield. I think Sankare had a great season last year after coming in the winter window. Vada really came on leaps and bounds. Le Raget, I think, is a very useful player. He can play in any of those three positions. Starting him over Vada is a little confusing given how exciting Vada can be with the ball at his feet on Thursday, but I think that remains to be seen. He'll be given priority over the course of the season. But that defensive midfield, I like Arambari. He's an intriguing young prospect, but there's a real lack of depth then between central defense and defensive midfield. If Toulalan is going to operate primarily as a defender, which it does seem like he's going to, then you've got a lack of depth in defensive midfield. But if you push him forward, then you really don't have another defender. I mean, you've got Teo Pellinar can play there, but he's not really a center back. He's more of a left back. Jovanovic is an intriguing player, but he's very young and showed that he still has some deficiencies in his game physically. I think that not in terms of his strength, but his tackling ability. I think he's still a little overenthusiastic, shall we say, and commits a few too many fouls. So I think defensively, as exciting as Bordeaux could be last season going forward, particularly after they switched to that 4-3-3, bringing in Sankare and starting Vada on the board. I think that defensively, a team that I've seen as perhaps looking at fourth, maybe even third if things go well. I think that lack of depth and balance in the Europa League could be a real issue for them, and I'm becoming less and less high on them as time goes on, and I don't see them bringing in players that add depth where they need it. And letting in a player like Palois, he's a head case. I think that we've seen that time and again. There's something, I think that his issues with anger or whatever you have, his composure on the pitch are really lacking. But in terms of his technical ability, is one of the better center backs in Ligue 1. I'm not saying he's going to be my team of the year, but he's above average for Ligue 1. And seeing him sold to Nantes for a relative pittance, I know he's 29, 28. He's not a young player, but he was very important for Bordeaux last season, despite his foibles. And I think that the lack of depth will present them with could really be problematic as they try, especially if they do advance to the group stage in Europe.
And finally, really on Bordeaux, Robin, we've sort of mentioned how middling this summer has really been, with the increase in quality of the teams around them in the likes of Marseille, who've just finished above them, and Lille. Have they sort of caught themselves stuck in the mud of not really progressing when they possibly had an opportunity to sort of rise along with them?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was always going to be a sort of awkward season for them because Lille and Marseille, sorry, were always going to be able to spend much more money than Bordeaux this summer. But I think there's been almost a sort of lack of ambition to go with them at this stage. Bordeaux are a team that you kind of associate with being in Europe and certainly pushing for the Champions League spots. And as Eric said, I just don't see how it's possible this year with the squad they've got at this stage. They might pick up, and I think they're actually going to have to pick up two or three more players. But at this stage, I just can't see how it's possible for them to compete on two fronts effectively. And as you say, they just look so far behind Lille and Marseille, at least in terms of their personnel at the moment.
And that's a real worry, really. But they caught us adrift last season, so I won't be surprised if they end up maybe doing something. Thank you, Robin, for joining us again. It's a pleasure always as having you on.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Right, we move on, Eric, to Caen, who, again, have had an interesting summer in the sense that they've brought in a couple of players that they had in on loan, like Gilbert, we've mentioned already. They've also brought Gico in from Bastia, but a lot of things seem to be hedging on what they're tending to do with Jan Karamo, with his contract expiring next summer and a couple of clubs sort of underbidding what they're expecting, like the likes of Fiorentina and the such. Is that sort of murky moment with him really blurring their transfer window and making them a little bit behind others and possible, again, relegation candidates?
I'd like to see Karamo stay at the club, but I think Caen have had a really good window. For a club of their means, they've gotten younger in key positions, bringing in Giku to replace Yaya, for example, someone who can play center back or right back. Keeping Frédéric Gilbert. I mean, this is a player who is versatile, can play as a wing back, a center back, orthodox right back. Really, really like that move. They've got Vincent Bassa and Imoru as options on the other side. They've kept Valentin Boissin. They brought in Bassam Sanko from Guingamp, Steph Peters, the Belgian. This is a team that's younger. They're not relying on a Steve Malbranc or I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name.
Julien Ferret.
Yes. No. The even older player. Just retired. He'd been there for forever.
He's not on the list, I don't think so.
Nicolas Soub.
Yes.
I think that this team's gotten younger. And while it is disappointing to see, the likes of Makengo say leave, I think that Caen are in a better position. Garand has always shown himself to, be astute enough tactically to get the best out of this team. They've maintained key players like Ronnie Rodlan, like Ivan Santini, who were very impressive for them last season. And I think that this team is more complete. They're still a little bit lacking in depth in certain attacking positions. If Santini or Rodlan were to be injured long term, I would have some questions about their ability to get things done, particularly if Karamo does leave. But no, I think Caen are in a better position than they were 2 or 3 months ago at the end of the season. I really, really like the moves they've made and have been, I think, making this team younger and more complete is absolutely the way forward. And even in keeping Garand, I think that, I know he's not, he's been sort of not had any defined success with Caen, but keeping the team of this means in the league year after year, especially when they've been oftentimes forced to lose some of their best players. And I think we look at Makengo this summer, Rafael Guerrero in years past, N'Golo Kante, Thomas Lemar. They're always a selling team. And Garand has kept them in the division. And I think that now he's got a younger, more versatile team at his hands. I think that Caen are in a really good position. I would be very surprised to see them struggle the way that they did last season.
Yeah, and although I would like Karamo to stay, I really hope that a club do put in the 10 million euros that Caen are asking for, because you don't want to see a small club like that not getting the money they probably deserve for developing a player like that, and to lose him on a free next summer or for the 3 million that Fiorentina were trying to throw at them, it will be a little bit of an insult really to the club. Hopefully that can be something they see in the future. But we move on and welcome our second guest of the evening. That's Samuel Rook of the Bleacher Report. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Hi guys, thanks for having me.
Pleasure as all ours. We'll start off with Toulouse with you, and they've reinforced their squad really with a few attacking players, with Corentin Jean signing a permanent deal and former Arsenal man Yaya Sanogo joining as well. What do you think to their summer transfer window? Has they done enough to really maybe attest to that slide that they had in 2017?
Well, it's difficult. They've made some smart moves. Corentin Jean was very solid on loan last season, and the story was he was going to be part of a deal that would take Issa Diop the other way to Monaco. That didn't happen. They've kept Issa Diop, which is so important. And getting Corentin Jean, that's great. That's a good start. Yaya Sanogo too. He's great for Ligue. He's big. He's strong. He's quick for this level. Didn't really get a look in at Arsenal, but great player at youth level. Won the Under-20 World Cup. He can really do something with Toulouse. Fresh start, new chance. But big loss in Martin Braithwaite. He scored a third of their goals last season, a third of their goals the season before. He's gone. They haven't really got someone who's going to guarantee them goals in the way that he did. And Oscar Trejo as well. He's left on a free transfer. That's another loss of goals and assists. So it's difficult to assess Toulouse's summer so far, but the key thing is they didn't lose Diop and they didn't lose Alban Lafont, the goalkeeper.
Yeah, and then adding in the mix of someone like Kawzak, who's maybe an explosive character, maybe saying that politely, that might be a weird, volatile mix. You mentioned the few defensive players there, Lafont and Diop, and obviously they've kept Julian as well, and they've got some interesting fullbacks. Will that be key for them this season, of that young defence that they have that was really impressive at times last season, continuing to grow as a unit?
Absolutely. That's what they're all about. Toulouse had the fourth worst attack in Ligue 1 last season, but they spent most of the season in the top half because they just don't concede goals. They had the fourth best defence. Only the top three had a better defence than them last season, and that is absolutely Dupraz's focus. He said today, I believe, that the defence is going to be key again. It's going to be very hard to roll over the top of them, and that's what they're going to do. They're going to set up to not get beaten first. And that's, again, that feeds into the signings they've made. They've looked at quick guys who are going to work on the counter-attack, and Sanogo's strength there to hold the ball up when they do break.
Yeah, and Eric, I want to bring you in on this, and it's an interesting mix, like we mentioned. They've added some fresh blood up front. There's an exciting young defence, but is there maybe a couple of worries about midfield? I know Alexis Blin has been decent last season, but is there maybe a lack of creativity in there?
Yeah, I think in losing Trejo, I would say that. I think Blin and Bodiger are really impressive players in that central area of midfield, but lacking that creativity of Trejo, I think that you're looking at a very thin roster in terms of players who can create chances. And I definitely agree with Sam about the potential for Sanogo to really impress. But if we're looking at Jimmy Dermaz, who are the creative players on this team? That's what I really struggle with looking at this side. There's certainly players who can put the ball in the back of the net, but that link between a solid defense and a decent attack, especially for Ligue 1, is, I think, really what this team are going to struggle with. I think that Dupraz is going to have to enact a tactical shift, moving away from that 4-2-3-1 that he tended to favor last season, to play something that perhaps allows the central midfielders a little bit more license in attack. Maybe a 4-3-3, but again, they don't really have wide players. Maybe Jean and Dermaz can play in those roles. It's going to be an interesting beginning to the season for Toulouse. If they don't get cut adrift, within the first 2 months or so, I don't see relegation being a worry. But it's going to take a lot of doing from Dupraz. And again, this is a manager who, you think back to the run in 2016, is the way he scraped that team off the bottom and got them survival. And they were decent last season, but perhaps underachieved a little bit, drifting towards the end of the season. I think it's going to take a real test of his tactical nous to get this team where they should be, given their history.
Sam.
Sorry, I've got an echo there. I didn't catch that.
Toulouse. Sam, can you hear me?
Just now, yep.
Yeah, that's all right. Do you think Toulouse will be sort of stuck in mid-table with so many teams above them at least improving?
I think they'll be satisfied with mid-table, honestly. I mean, the squad, as we've sort of covered, is a little bit thin. A handful of injuries to the wrong players and they could find themselves in trouble. There are worse teams than them, but honestly, mid-table would be, I think, a pretty solid finish for this group this season.
Yeah, I think they'll be more than happy about that. We'll move on now to a team that's had an absolutely insane window, really, by any standards, and that's Lille. Lots of big moves, lots of big players, a big manager as well, Sam. What can we expect from this group? I mean, there's a lot of unknowns. There's a couple of interesting prospects there. What do you think for Ligue this season?
Well, I mean, as you say, when you have this much turnover in a summer, it's difficult to make grand predictions. They've signed 15 players. They've let go almost as many. There's still a handful waiting to leave, like Vincent Nyema, Marvin Martin, the players like this who are still probably going to leave. So it's difficult to predict. But this team already is playing Bielsa football. Their preseason matches have been impressive, quietly impressive. They look really strong. I think they will be up there. Not title challenging, perhaps, but they could very well be the Nice of this season.
Eric, I want to bring you in on this as well. And you mentioned Nicolas Pepe earlier as well as a bit of an interesting signing, maybe a bit too much. But there's Thiago Maia, who's got a lot of hype about him. We've talked about Kevin Malcuit a number of times as well and his prospects. What do you think to their summer signings then? Is there plenty of intrigue here of exciting footballers coming in?
Yeah, I think so. The two that I really like, again, this might sound a little bit short-sighted, but I think we've seen that the style of Ligue 1 has been somewhat difficult for players to adjust to coming in at times, particularly if they haven't played European football before. Jemerson from Monaco would be a great example of someone who came in January of 16, but really took sort of that 6 months in a preseason to adjust. So the Brazilian players, I don't disagree, are really intriguing and really interesting, and I really think can be important down the road. And I wouldn't also underestimate, by the way, Bielsa's ability to get them up to speed more quickly than perhaps other managers would. But I really like the signings of Kevin Malcuit, who had been linked with a variety of Premier League. I think that in terms of his dynamism, his directness, I know it sounds ludicrous given that Corsia is a French international, but I think that in terms of energy and a style of play, I think that Malcuit is better going forward than Corsia. Corsia is probably a better player overall, but given how exciting that he could be from right back, I think that's impressive. And the young center back, Edgar Aye from Belenenses, a Portuguese under-21 international, fairly accomplished at center back, especially given his age. I really think he could be a very important player as well, particularly given that this team is getting, still has some questions in terms of central defense. They were forced to play Amadou in central defense last season when Soumaoro was injured. Marco Basha is still a decent player, but he's no younger. And Junior Alonso doesn't really convince me, to be honest, as a center back. I think he could be a decent option at left back, but I think that that's a question mark as well. So, yeah, I think that they've done well, but those Brazilian players in particular could take a little bit of time to blood in, and in the meantime, I think that we should look at those two in particular, Aye and Malcuit, as being important. Again, Pepe, this is a player who couldn't start for Angers. I don't get the fee attached to him. Leon had been linked to him. My reaction as a fan was, why? You have Maxwell Cornet, who's a year younger and better at present. I just don't get the hype around this player. I think that he's a cut rate Saint-Maximin, and Saint-Maximin's already a cut rate version of something else. I don't get the hype. Maybe Bielsa, again, has this reputation for improving young players and get the best out of him. Bielsa perhaps sees him as a pet project or something, but for the money, great for Angers. I think they've reinvested it really wisely. We'll get to them later. But I don't see it. I think that Lille are an exciting team, and I think they brought in some good players to add to what they have. Martin Terrier is a young left winger who I see big things for as well. But I see, given the lack of European experience for some of these players that have come in, it could be being a little bit difficult for this team to hit the ground running. If things really line up well for them, Europe is definitely a possibility, maybe even Champions League, given the amount of uncertainty that's in and around the top 7. But it's again, this team is the ultimate wild card in the league. I could see them finishing anywhere from 2nd to 11th.
It's just strange and cutting words on Pepe, Eric. Sam, I want to talk about a couple of the departures as well. I mean, there's a lot come in, but Corshier's been allowed to leave and maybe a little bit easily, although Malcui's a relatively decent replacement. And Naim Sliti's been allowed to join Dijon on loan, and he had was one of the brighter spots of last season. Is maybe too much upheaval this soon a little bit of a risk?
Definitely, it's definitely a big risk. But I mean, that's Bielsa. He's not known as El Loco for nothing. It's very much his way or the highway. The club have backed him to the hilt. They've spent a lot of money. They've made big changes. A guy like Corsia being allowed to leave, other long-term stalwarts of the club being allowed to leave. They believe in him, and I guess until we have evidence otherwise, we're all going to have to try that.
And yeah, is that the main focus this season, really, of what Bielsa can do with this squad and how quickly he can sort of transform them into this behemoth that he tends to pull out of teams, especially as we've seen fast starts when he was at Marseille previously?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's all really just down to Bielsa. He's the star signing more than any of these other guys. Thiago Maia is a really exciting player who really could be something special. But it's all just down to Bielsa. If he can transform these players, if he can get some of the young players coming through, developing at the rate he has done at virtually all his other clubs, it's taken time, a few months sometimes, but he usually gets this thing going pretty quickly. As you say, Marseille, athletic club as well, and previously in Mexico and Argentina, he does this quickly, he does it well, and his teams are just great fun.
Yeah, and it's especially what we're going to have this season, I think, from Lille, hopefully at least. Thank you for joining us this evening, Sam. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
All right, thanks, guys.
We'll move on to another team now that I've had maybe a bit of a, not a great summer, I wouldn't say necessarily, Eric, unless you've spotted anything that's really pulled out for you. But Dijon have lost their main striker in Lois Diony, who's head to Saint-Etienne, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. But does losing a player like that scored so many goals and was a real focal point for their style, especially given how many goals they conceded, does that really cripple them this season? Or with the likes of Jeannot and Wesley Saïd coming in, are they good enough?
I have my doubts. I think that Dijon's shakiness at the back last season certainly doesn't inspire any confidence in me. And Lise Malou and Diony, I think Diony could be just what Saint-Etienne. I know we'll get to them later, but I really like that move for Saint-Etienne, even given the premium, which I think was a club record. But Lise Malou, his creativity and versatility too. He could really play in any of the midfield roles, even different systems. I think that the players they brought in have a decent amount of experience. Jeannot, Saïd, Lautoa, Sliti, Biamberry from Bordeaux, all have played in Ligue 1 to some extent, but none of them have ever really been given a consistent run in the team or have demonstrated that they're worthy of it. And I just see them as being players of a quality below Ligue 1. And I don't see Dijon, for that reason, being able to maintain their status. Now, that being said, I think the bottom 7 or 8 teams in this league all have serious flaws. And by dint of that, Dijon could stay up. I like Olivier Delalio as a manager. I think he is someone who, again, credit him coming up last season and playing positive attacking football. Dijon we're good to watch. I think we shouldn't sell them short on that. But this is a team that I think that, and also Younous Abdelhamid, is a decent player as well, going to Reims. The fact that Ligue Desai can offer him more promise of promotion, maybe better wages, that's surprising as well. I can see Dijon doing okay, but only because other teams are so much worse than them.
It's a real worry. And you mentioned losing Lys Milou, who's gone to Nice and did okay probably in the Champions League game. But that's
they're being very charitable there, Nathan.
Yeah.
I thought he was the worst player on the pitch for Nice.
It's a nice jump up for him, at least, anyway. Maybe not so for Nice, but yeah, they had two big losses, really. I really worry about them this season. We're going to introduce our final guest of the evening, and joining us for the rest of the show is the excellent Adam White. Thank you, Adam, for joining us.
No worries, Nathan. Good to hear from you.
Yeah, it's been a while. We'll move on to that team that we've briefly touched on, and that's Saint-Etienne, who've got a new manager in Oscar Garcia. They've got Luis Dioni in to score the goals now. Is this finally the Ligue we were hoping for, that they maybe can push on, given the improvements of some of these other sides around them?
I would like to say yes, but unfortunately, I think I'm going to have to stick to my usual opinion on Saint-Etienne on our podcast on Thursday nights over the course of last season, in that they're just very, very uninspiring. I think the loss of Christophe Galtier, although it was the right decision for him to leave, will prove, in the short term at least, very difficult for them to overcome, because they had an very average squad, and especially in midfield, they lacked creativity, they lacked pace, and they lacked any sort of dynamism in that sort of area of the field, and they struggled to score goals. They were very, very solid defensively, and they built on that defensive base for many years, and he really grinded results out of what was an average squad. And without him, I don't see that kicking on. I don't know that Oscar Garcia is the type of manager that perhaps Saint-Etienne fans were hoping for. I know that people like Claudio Ranieri linked at one point. Obviously, he went to Nantes at the end, and there were a few other names that are probably a little bit more exciting and more inspiring. I know that he did a good job at Red Bull Salzburg. They kind of changed their philosophy and sort of trying to become the Basel of Austria, making the Champions League group stages every so often and pushing on from there, and it wasn't really working. So they switched up their strategy and dialed it down a bit, and they still were successful in the league. But I don't know that he's got the credentials to take this team and take a step on from Galtier. They're very, very aware that they don't have the resources of the other top 6-7 clubs. And they've said, they're proud to be like a French-owned club and everything. But I think if they had foreign investment, as a possibility, they would, gladly take it, because I think they're a step behind, even 2 steps behind the top 7 that Eric mentioned previously. If you look at their squad, I think Dioni is a good signing. I like him a lot. I think him and Tavares are great for Dijon last season. And I think, he got 11 goals last year in the league. It's difficult to score goals in. So I think for Saint-Etienne, he could be a really nice little signing. If they can keep Beric fit, I think he can score goals too. So there is some sort of light there. But you look at their midfield again, it's the same sort of situation. With Fabien Lemoine leaving, they're down to Brian Dabo, Vincent Pageau, Ola Selnes. Clement's still out in the cold. Kenny Rocha Santos is 17, and he's sort of come into the side in pre-season end of last year and looks interesting, like a little bit more flair perhaps, but they just lack ideas in that area. And I really think without Gautier's sort of nous and sort of that Ligue nous that he really showed over an extended period, I fear for them this season. I really think they're looking at bottom half as it stands.
Interesting one. Eric, I want to bring you in on this, and there's a few interesting departures, really. Neil Maupay's gone, Malcui's gone as well, obviously to Lille, like we mentioned earlier. Nolan Roux has finally been pushed out the door as well. Have they maybe sort of not quite done enough? I mean, I know you mentioned you really like the signing of Dioni, but other than that, they've not really pushed.
Sorry, Nathan, you're just cutting out a bit.
What is a whole?
Nathan, you're just cutting out a bit for me.
They maybe not.
I'm sorry, Nathan. I'm not getting any of this.
Try something.
Nathan, I didn't get any of that. I'm sorry.
Me at all.
You're cutting out. I guess I'll address Saint-Etienne's signings that I do like. Sedi Yanko from Celtic, I think, has a lot of potential at right back to come in immediately and replace Gavin Malcuit. But the rest of the players they brought in, besides Dioni, it is largely the same thing. But I don't know. I think if you look at the quality of these players on their day, the likes of Apajo, Selnes, Dabo, even Romain Amouma, Kevin Monet-Paquet, Laura Perrin, they're still a decent amount of quality. These are all above average Ligue 1 players. And I don't think that Saint-Etienne are going to fall off a cliff. I just think Europe's unlikely. I think at this point in time, I don't see them being top 6.
Am I getting any better now? Can everyone hear me? Go okay?
Yes.
Super. Yeah. I agree. They look like, I was mentioning very quickly, that they sort of sat still and not really pushed on enough, especially with the clubs around them. I know they've not quite got the resources, and they're going to trust a couple of more in the younger players, like when with Malcuig on. His name escapes me, but it's RPG. I always remember that. It's
Gabriel.
Yes, they're clearly going to probably push him into that role, although Yanko will also have a question mark about that. But they've just not, again, they've not addressed the midfield issue that's been an issue for 2 or 3 seasons now. They've not probably got enough width strength. I know Amuma is still a very good player, but maybe we need someone on the other side as well that's really going to push them forward. I do worry about it. I think they'll maybe not drop as far as the bottom half, but they are going to be a mid-table side this season, given the strengths of everyone else, at least from what we've seen so far. Let's move on to a new team to Ligue 1, and that's Amiens, who had a terrific moment really in that final game of the Ligue 2 season, scoring in the very final seconds to get themselves up. But being in that surprise package, Adam, from last season, where they really did successive promotions, are they going to struggle? It's always a tough one for these teams that have such little resources. Yeah,
it really is. You're absolutely right. It's an interesting one because they've made 1 or 2 interesting signings, and if you look at sides that have been promoted in the last couple of seasons, they sort of almost fall into one of 2 categories. In that, one, they go out and they sign experience, and they sign sort of quality in terms, not just from Ligue 1, like maybe some Ligue 1 experience, as Metz did last year. Sort of Renaud Cad, Diabate, those sort of players came in, or they sort of repackage themselves after promotion from Ligue 2, as Nancy did last year. They didn't really sign anybody in particular. They won the league, obviously, in Ligue 2 the season before, and they sort of used that quality and that base, if you like, to build on that success in Ligue 1. And obviously they go one of 2 ways. Metz last season just stayed up, in my opinion. If they hadn't signed Diabate, they would have been relegated. And Nancy were a bit unlucky towards the end of the season, came very, very close despite what was a poor squad by Ligue 1 standards. And Amiens are sort of similar to Nancy in that they haven't really gone out and signed too many players. I mean, I think Mathieu Bodmer has come in, and I think that's a really, really good signing from their point of view. Although, yes, he's 34 now, but he's got so much Ligue 1 experience at so many big Ligue 1 clubs, at PSG and Lyon and various Marseille. I think he may have maybe not played for Marseille, but he's played for quite a few Ligue 1 clubs, and he's been around the block, and he really knows. He'll be really, really good for the dressing room, for the squad in general, and helping some of the younger players and less experienced players coming through. So he's a good signing. But when you're looking behind him, there really isn't anybody that stands out except Gael Kakuta, who hasn't actually played for them yet. He's got some weird contractual dispute with Hebei China Fortune, where they're sort of trying to sort of arrange, sort of finalise the deal. So there's question marks whether they even sign him. So you're looking at like a Ligue 2 squad, and it's not a Ligue 2 winning squad. It's a Ligue 2 squad that got promoted by the skin of its teeth, as we saw on the last day of last season. So going by that sort of form, if you like, then they're going to be really in trouble this season. And I think we look a season further back when Troyes won Ligue 2 and got promoted. They were unable to sign players because of financial restrictions, and the LFP were sort of came down hard on them for not meeting their budget. And they, as we know, hugely struggled in a very similar way to Nancy did towards the end of last season. Obviously, Pablo Correa was a bit more wise, and he sort of used his squad in slightly different ways, whereas Troyes were a bit open at the back, and they were suffered terribly of injuries. But I hope from Amiens' point of view that they're going to be towards the Nancy end of the spectrum rather than towards Troyes, the Troyes sort of form as they were in 2 seasons ago. So I think either way they're going to be in a relegation battle. But I think, given the way they played last season, and they definitely showed a lot of sort of togetherness and team spirit, and it's the kind of thing that you talk about promoted sides and the stuff that kind of does feed into the way they're going to perform in Ligue 1. So it'd be really interesting to see how they carry over their Ligue 2 displays, and whether they try and play the same type of football they did at the end of last season, or they try and be a little bit more defensive. I know they've played 5 at the back in a few preseason games, so there may be a sort of idea from the manager to be a little bit more defensive, which is wise, I think, at least to start with. But I think for them, whatever the course of their season takes, I think it's going to be. I think 17th would be extremely good if they finish that high up. Like they're going to be in a relegation battle, whatever the situation. But I think it's a really, the first time in Ligue and they've ever been in Ligue, and it'd be really good fun to see them. And hopefully they can give us some upsets along the way and make a good fist of it.
Yeah, Eric, is that the most we can really hope for from Amiens? Maybe a nice little tour around France for a change. I know that might seem a little bit harsh for them, but it is such a big leap.
Well, I mean, you never know. I think, expressed similar sentiments about Metz last season, ahead of the season, and as Adam rightly said, they were able to make some canny signings, and there's something to say Amiens can't do that in January, but I think that, yeah, if survival is achieved, it's the skin of their teeth. I have them in my own bottom three, along with Strasbourg, and at this point, and I don't see anything better than a chance at survival for them. I would say 80% chance they go down.
Yeah,
I think it might be sort of a similar case to Gazalek Ajaccio when they got promoted, who again didn't make many signings, but really did make a good fist of it and came pretty close towards the end. Maybe they might have had more of a chance if Toulouse hadn't sort of steamed past them and Reims that season, but they're in a similar sort of position in terms of quality of squad. So they might have a similar sort of season to Gazalek that time, maybe. But
that's an interesting point. But I would say in counter to that, a lot of the players that Gazalek had signed at that point, if you look at like a Boutaïb or a Kader Manjan, had Ligue 1 experience, and I don't see that being as much the case with the players that Amiens have signed. I like Sissoko, I like Bodmer as well, but it's a lot of reliance on young players and players who just don't have experience. That's why I'm not as high on Strasbourg, who we'll get to later. Those players a lot of them haven't even played professional football prior to last season. And I think that's something that, even though Pellissier has been outstanding as a manager, if he doesn't have the experience to translate that into Ligue 1, that's something that I really think is a real potential stumbling block for Amiens.
I do fear for them as well. I think it's always a big jump to go 2 jumps, and really to make that an extra jump and still stay competitive can be so difficult. On to another team that struggled at times last season, and that's Montpellier. They've lost Steve Mounier, who's gone to Huddersfield as well, and they've made some interesting moves, is maybe the nice way of putting it, in Lecomte and Giovanni Sio, and Boudebouz is still there, at least for now, although there's rumours of the moves finally looking to go ahead now. Where are they this season, Adam? Are they still going to be in and around those relegation places, or are they more of a mid-table side?
I think it's, for me anyway, it'd be interesting to see what Eric thinks about this too, but I think I've got them in my bottom 3 as it stands. If Riyad Boudebouz leaves between now and the end of the transfer window, and they don't effectively replace him, which is going to be extremely difficult to replace a quality player like Boudebouz this close to the end of really a month left of the transfer window, and for Montpellier to find a player of that quality to replace him is going to be extremely difficult. Having lost Steve Mounier already as well. I mean, you have made some interesting signings. I mean, they've tried to sort of bring in a little bit of sort of Ligue, and now again they've signed Giovanni Sio, who obviously is a bit of a up and down to say the least at Rennes the last few seasons. Benjamin Leconte's a good goalkeeper from Lorient. He's been very good last few years, so he's a good signing. But beyond that, Jonathan Ikone came back from PSG. I don't know if he really set the world alight there last season on loan. Kevin Beauregard is a classic French striker, doesn't score goals. I really feel like they don't have the quality if they lose Boudebouz to stay in this league, and I'd be fearing for them this season. I mean, Victorino Hilton is 39 now, so whether he's capable of keeping them in the division for another year is very much open to debate. So I think it's going to be key is how they manage themselves between now and the end of August. If they manage to sign a couple of good players, so they get some money for Boudebouz and they replace him fairly adequately, they managed to find another striker to replace Mooney, because that Mooney was a little bit of a surprise last season, and they got good money for him too. So they've got the funds you would imagine to go out and strengthen. But for me, I think they're very much in trouble this year.
I do take your point, Adam, that Mounier is a big loss, but let's not forget they still have Casimir Ninga. This is a player who I think was more than decent during this sort of season and a half that he had before he was injured. And Mounier was really only given his chance as a result of Ninga's injury. And we've seen Montpellier, and again, it remains to be seen, now that they're under a new manager in Derzakarian. God, I can't. That's another story. I really don't like that appointment. But if they can be the same sort of counterattacking side that they were last season, I think Ninga fits that mold even better. And I think that I like the signing of Ikone personally. I think he was very impressive, given his age and lack of experience. I think that Mendes and Sio, okay, again, they're not ideal, but I think they're potentially upgrades. I think that the fullbacks and the likes of Roussillon and Mukiele are of a good quality as well and still young. Lecomte, I think, could potentially be an upgrade if he plays to be the player that he looked like he was being 3 or 4 years ago. I know he struggled to some extent last season. I think Montpellier will be all right. I think lower mid-table, unless Derzakarian has a falling out with several or some of the players, which again, is a very big possibility. But
yeah,
I think they're in decent shape, especially if Ninga can recover some of the form that we saw from him a few years ago.
I think whatever happens, Eric, I think they're not going to be exciting to watch. With Derzakarian as manager, who was obviously non-manager for those 2 seasons where they finished bottom of the goal scored table and then second bottom to Troyes, who were below them in the 2 seasons, and both. So they stayed up relatively comfortably, but they were very, very dull. And perhaps he's got the makings of another sort of Nantes, another Derzakarian team in Ligue and in Montpellier, that they could sort of grind out the results and win a few games at home here and there and not score many goals at all. And it might be enough to keep them up. One point with Ninga is that cruciate ligament injury that kept him out for most of last season. For a player that relies on such sort of flair and such sort of change of direction, it's going to be very difficult for him to pick up where he left off anytime soon. So I agree that he's a player that's very useful to them, but whether he can rediscover that form anytime soon is still open to debate.
Yeah, I'm worried. I don't like the signing of Giovanni Sio, and it doesn't really need to speak volumes of why that might be. And if they lose Riyad Boudibous, which they probably will, I think someone's going to stump up the 10, 12 million that they're probably going to be asking for. I can't imagine why someone's not already. But yeah, you really start worrying about this team if they can't score goals. If they've got Mikel Derzakarian as their manager, it doesn't look as positive either. They're going to be there or thereabouts, aren't they? But let's move on to Nantes, who have had their own managerial changes. Claudio Ranieri has come into the job, and Conceição has returned to Portugal to manage Porto. Adam, is that a real big miss for them? I mean, we all talked about how well Conceição transformed this side last season, and even possibly moving to like a Lyon or something like that. He's gone to another big club as well, but he's going to be a big miss, isn't he?
He really is, yeah, Nathan. I 100% agree with that. He was unbelievable for them last year. I know, speaking to the Portuguese analyst at Football Radar, that he had a bit of a reputation for being obviously very volatile, but not necessarily sort of consistent. And he wasn't very even-handed, and he'd very easily sort of fluff the handle and make sort of odd decisions and fall out with players and things. But coming to Nantes, he kind of treated them with I might have mentioned in one of the articles that me and Eric wrote for the site that he sort of treated his squad like sort of some kids who'd misbehaved at school, and he was a parent who'd come home to find out they'd been misbehaving and was very, very upset with them. So he just sort of disappointed, and he sort of really whipped them into shape. It was really, really almost overnight. They lost that game 6-0 to Lyon at the end of Girard's reign, and they looked so insipid and so lacking in ideas and lackluster. And he took them to 7th place, which was unbelievable. They had some fantastic wins. They started scoring goals out of nowhere. Salah and Nakuma were fantastic up front, and they played with like an intensity. He really instilled that fire in his team that that Conceição sort of espouses when he's on the touchline. He's very, very, very animated, and he really put that. It really was his team. I think though. It is a big miss, but one thing that you can take as a positive from this situation is not that Claudio Ranieri coming in is going to be a lot of fun. Whatever happens with Nantes this season, whether they finish 15th or 5th, they're going to be great value. I think from Ranieri's point of view, he did a similar thing perhaps. And other clubs he's turned up, maybe Leicester to start with when Nigel Pearson kept them up and they played really well at the end of that season and Ranieri took over, that perhaps there's not a vast amount that he needs to change here. If he can keep hold of his players, if he can keep Guillaume Gillet, who's obviously for me, the most important player in midfield, Belgian international, really was brilliant the last couple of years, adds a lot of stature to that team. and presence. If you can keep him and keep his other players together, the signing of Nicola Powell as defensive security, I think that's a really good signing for them. The Tata, the Romanian goalkeeper from Fiorentina, could be a really good signing too, because that's kind of been a problem position for them over recent months from the last season, where Remy Riou dropped out and Maxime Dupé came in and perhaps didn't necessarily cover himself in glory. I remember one game at Bastia where they drew 2-2 away. He was at fault for both goals, which I think we've discussed on the pod before. So there's a lot of bright spots for Nantes here. I'd be disappointed to see Conceição go, but I think if you can get the Stade de la Bourgeois crowd up and you can get the team playing with intensity, then there's still a lot to work with here. We talked a little about Valentin Rongier in the pod at the end of last year, who really pushed on after that. He had that horrible knee injury, and he sort of came into the side again last year. And he's a player I really like, and he was fantastic towards the end of the year. And I think even there were rumours that Conceição wanted to take him to Porto, which would have been perhaps a bit soon, but you can see the quality there. I think they've got a lot of potential. So I think Ranieri's got a lot to work with. Hopefully he'll just try and maintain that intensity and keep them going forward. But unfortunately, I have a feeling that might not be the case. They've played 3 at the back, three centre-backs in some games in pre-season. And he's talked about the most important thing is not conceding, which seems like a little bit of a sea change from Conceição. So I think it's a little bit up in the air as to how they're going to go. But I'm going to enjoy watching it, whatever happens.
Yeah, and it does make you panic a little bit. And I know you didn't quite want to tackle his name, but Tata Rossano is a solid goalkeeper to bring in, I think, as well, from Fiorentina, definitely.
Good work,
Eric,
Nathan, good work. I wasn't going to attempt it.
Yeah, I love his name, so I will happily say that one. Eric, there's one big departure really for Nantes, and that's Amin Harit, who's joined Schalke. What do you think to that departure? Is that the right move for him? Is that the right time for the club?
I think that not got good money for him. I think that he underachieved. He butted heads too much with Conceição and couldn't humble himself enough to be included as part of the team. I think that it's the right move for the club, the right move for the player. I think it remains to be seen. Schalke are a really interesting situation, a club that obviously have money, have ambitions, but not making Europe last year was a huge deal for them. Could they improve on that this year and have Harit be a part of that? Potentially, but I don't see it happening. I think that he's going to be a what-if story down the road. The one player I did want to mention I think has a lot of potential is Kayembe, signed from Porto B. He's a right-sided attacking player, and if the team do play a 3-5-2, I really like the looks of him as a wing-back. So he's one to watch out for. He scored 6 goals from a wide position in about 18 matches for Porto's B team last season, and I think could be a real upgrade on the likes of, say, a Kastanich or a Felipe Pardo on that right side, and you could have Thomason playing on the other flank and have, I think, a really complete side. But again, I do share largely Adam's doubts on Nantes' season. I think that the managerial change is it has thrown a lot of question marks into what had been a very hardworking yet still relatively attractive side under Conceição.
Let's hope the Italian can bring some of that dilly-ding, dilly-dong back to Nantes. That'd be really nice if he can. Let's move on to Angers, and they've lost a few important players. And Pepe's gone to Lille. Diedhiou's head to England with Bristol City, Adam. But they've gained a striker in Enzo Crivelli as well, who's done decently on loan at Bastia last season and has shown flashes at Bordeaux. He might be the kind of striker this club needs.
Yeah, I think so. I was I think about this a lot today because there's sort of, it almost feels like there's sort of they've signed Crivelli to replace De Heydou, which I'm sort of trying to figure out whether that's the right strategy, because I liked De Heydou last season. I think Angers definitely took a risk with him. He scored lots of goals at the start of 2 seasons ago for Clermont, and raced away with that Ligue de top goal scorer award, which perhaps isn't the most difficult thing to race away with, but even so, he scored a lot of goals before Christmas, and then went on a big drought. I think he scored 1 or 2 in 18 games, and when he came to Angers, he was it was a risk, and he played very well last season. Not necessarily prolific, but held up the ball really well, allowed players like Carl Toko Ekambi to run beyond him, and Doy to get into the box and win headers and score goals, which he's so wonderfully good at. I was just trying to think with Cavelli is a similar sort of player. I think he just about fits the bill, because he has that physicality that De Gea had, and he's shown that in Ligue with Bastia, who obviously finished bottom last season, and I think he got into double figures. He got 9 or 10 perhaps last season, which is in a league, as I said, it's very difficult to score goals in. That's relatively impressive. And as you said, he did show flashes of that form when he was at Bordeaux too. So I think it's a good idea. It could really work out for them, but it still remains to be seen. I think one positive though, they sort of hedged their bets a little bit in signing Baptiste Guillem, who's sort of come in as well as a potential striker. Who was obviously at Strasbourg last year, was at Lens and at Lille as well, and particularly at Lille was pretty poor. But it's one of those players that's always had potential but never really realised it. And I felt he was a little bit lightweight before. But playing for Angers in pre-season, he's looked good, and he's looked much bigger, much stronger than he had before. He was a bit too slight, a bit lightweight before. So hopefully, after a good season with Strasbourg, then he could be an option too. So there's a bit of competition up there. But the thing for them this year is can they survive without Sheikh Ndoye, who is unbelievable since their promotion from Ligue 2. Signed from Katele, immediately made him captain, and he really showed why. He was the top scorer in their first season back in Ligue, and he's gone to Birmingham to join Harry Redknapp, which is be interesting to see how he gets on there. But there's a big hole in their midfield as a result, and they've signed Asana Koulibaly from Bastia too. I don't know that there is that he's the right man necessarily. Obviously, he's young; he's only 21. But whether he's the player to replace, the very, very big shoes of Ndoye is possibly an even bigger question for Stéphane Moulin this season. But I think again they're going to be an interesting side. I've not hidden how much I like them on the pod beforehand, and I hope that they can kick on once again and have an interesting season. Making the cup final last season was huge for them, and they're an interesting side. Thomas Mangini, if anybody that doesn't get the chance to watch Angers very often, I think Thomas Mangini on his own is a reason to watch Angers play. He's so good on the ball, such a wonderful player to watch. One of my favourite players in the league. And hopefully he'll find another good partner in that building in Koulibaly, and they'll stay as a mid-table side and not get dragged into that relegation battle.
Yeah, and we can look forward to having Billy Keo Fonfon take the field again. It'll be nice to see him back when he returns from injury, so we can all enjoy his name again. It'll be nice. But we've mentioned a few interesting options that they've added, Eric, but they've obviously lost a fair few attacking talent that did score a lot of their goals last season. And given their alarming sort of 2016, at least, half of the season, where they really looked like they were probably relegation candidates, is there still maybe a worry there, or do you think Stéphane Moulin has this team exactly where they need to be?
No, I think that now that he's had the time to work with players like a Karl Toko Ekambi and to adapt them, their playing, I think that this team is probably about the same or maybe better as last season. The thing that I really like about Angers' offseason is that they've done well to bring in young, promising players. Crivelli, Koulibaly, as you mentioned, Angelo Fungini from Valenciennes is a French youth international. He looks to be playing more as a right-sided attacker. He can also play central midfield. I think he'll add more depth as well. And there's also likes of like a Saliou Ciss, who's brought in as well. Not a world beater, but again, someone who can give depth. I think that we looked at the injuries to the fullback last season, and Angers really struggled in those positions, having to bring in Abdoulaye Bamba in the winter from free agency, I believe. So I think that the team have more depth. I am still a little worried about center backs beyond Tomas and Traore, who are, again, more than decent options. But if one of them has a long-term injury, you're looking at maybe Pavlovic, maybe Mehdi Tarat being played as a center back. And that could cause some worry as well. But I think overall, this is a fairly complete and fairly deep squad. And I don't really see relegation being a worry. I think that their proactivity in signing young, promising players in the summer, I think is going to bear fruit for them.
Yeah, Moulin has been excellent ever since they've come up to Ligue 1, and keeping that team solid at the back will be very important to sort of keep them afloat. If they can get the goals from Crivelli, that'll just add to them and really push them on again to a sort of mid-table side. Again, I think there will be this season, hopefully. But moving on to the classic yo-yo club, and that's Troyes, who are back again after knocking out Lorient in the playoff during this end of last season. They've made a few interesting signings again, although obviously they didn't get a chance to last time they were here, Adam. But there's a few familiar names from French football mixed around them. Viscarondo Desplan as well from Montpellier. have they added enough to really compete this time, or do you worry again that this might be a case of one and done again for Troyes?
Well, yeah, it's definitely a very interesting. I think it'll be a very interesting story in Ligue this season. As you mentioned, when they came up, because of financial issues, they really weren't able to make any signings, and they had a dreadful season and finished bottom by a long, long way. And it was really horrible for that club during that year. So I definitely think that, given that they've obviously their budget's been managed a bit better this year and have been able to sign some Ligue experience, as we talked about other clubs doing that previously on the podcast, that that can be really important for a promoted side, just to get that Ligue experience in and get a little bit more quality. Obviously, for a promoted team, that's job one really. But I think this season that they definitely will improve on their previous showing. I think the signing of Vizcarrondo is a good one. He's 33 now. He's a bit sort of lumbering at times, and he dropped out of the Nantes team last season, with obviously Diego Carson and Kofi Gigi being playing very well together. But I think he's a very good signing for a club like Troyes. He'll add a lot of experience and a lot of leadership, which is what they lacked in so much. They lacked so much leadership in their previous run in the division. So he'll really add that defensive security. As long as he's got someone playing on the side with a bit of pace, and hopefully Gabriel on loan from Lille, who obviously they signed over the winter. He could be a really interesting partner for Vizcarrondo, and perhaps provide a little bit of cover for the sort of aging legs of the Venezuelan. Mathieu Duplan obviously has been around the league for a while, still only 25. He's got something to prove perhaps, and he's a good signing at fullback. I think though they're kind of relying a little bit in forward areas on Benjamin Nive, which is ridiculous considering he's 40 years old. It feels like that they've made the biggest effort to strengthen in defensive areas, which was necessary, because they kind of were lacking in that area, and it makes sense to prioritise there. But once again, perhaps like clubs last year, like Nancy, really did struggle to score goals. I think that might be the same for Troyes this time around. And obviously, they can't rely on Benjamin Nive week in, week out in this league, because of his age. Obviously places obvious limitations on his ability to play so many games in quick succession. They may use him at home and rest him for away games, which is they've done before, which would probably be a good idea. They've also signed Francois Balaguer in that midfield, but again, it's sort of a very defensive option. He can also play at centre back too, and he might end up being Vizcarrondo's partner at one point. Looking at forward areas, they as I said, they look a little bit light. I like Stefan Darbion. I think he's 33 now, but he's been a good player for them for 2 or 3 years now. And the only real addition they've made is Brian Pele from Brest. So it's still a little bit lightweight in forward areas for me. So if they're going to sign anybody else between now and the end of the window, you'd hope that it would be either a striker or put a little bit more league and experience in wide areas. But I think one thing's for sure, they'll definitely be a lot more competitive than they were in 15, 16. And it won't be the nightmare that it was for Troyes fans. But whether they'll stay up, I don't know. I think it's going to be close to them as well. But I think we've got a good fight at the bottom of the table, and I think they'll be very much in amongst it.
I'm a little bit worried about Troyes again this season. Some of those signings are a little bit uninspiring, at least, and given the other teams around them, if they can't score goals, I'm a little bit worried for them again. But let's hope it's at least not as bad as it was last time around. But we'll move on to Metz now, who've had a little bit of a disappointing summer, really, Eric, in certain terms. Obviously, the loss of Ismaili Sarr, although it was a great fee, is a little bit disappointing given his talent, and not returning Sheikh Diabate, instead getting Nolan Roux. Is that enough for them to really stave off relegation for a second time?
I think that Mets can be cautiously optimistic, but again, I don't really think it's by dint of anything they've done. It's because there are poorer teams than them. I really like the signing of Niakate from Valenciennes, and I think that Roux is given time, can be good for 10 or 12 goals, which I think could be enough. Some of their older players have departed. Signorino in particular. I think that can give a little bit more chance to some of the younger players that they've got there to potentially improve. So, better fitness from Jan Jouf, Renaud Kohad can have another good season. I think they'll be all right, but not because they're going to blow anybody away, but only because there's many worse teams than them.
Adam, what do you think? Do they maybe need to reinvest now some of that money they got for Sarr in maybe rounding out this squad to really make sure that they're going to be staying away from the relegation places?
Yeah, I think 100% they do. I think the reason they stayed up last year was Sheikh Diabate and Sarr as well, obviously to some extent. But if they hadn't signed Diabate to score very, very crucial goals in that second half of the season, I think they would have gone down. And without him and without Sarr and without real replacements for either of those players, I think they're going to be in amongst it too. As Eric said, they might step us due to teams being worse than them. But I have a feeling that Metz might be one of those teams that are worse than other teams that might keep them up. Yanjouf, if he could keep fit, he's a wonderful player and was brilliant for Lorient for a long time, but he was terrible in terms of fitness last year, continually got injured and couldn't contribute to the extent they would have hoped. If he can stay fit, he could be the man to keep them in the division, but without Diabate and Sarr, I think they look in massive trouble. In a similar way to Montpellier, if they lose Riyad Boudebouz, I think they'd be in a very similar position. Nolan Roux is a mental signing. I have no idea why they've signed him. It's ridiculous because he's never impressed in Ligue 1, really. He's been terrible for Lille and then for Saint-Etienne, and I don't know why they feel like they could replace someone like Diabate, who has so much Ligue 1 experience and so many Ligue 1 goals under his belt, and has really been a talisman for them with Nolan Roux. I think it's a bizarre one for me, and maybe it's budget restraints perhaps, but I think with Roux in the side, do I see them scoring goals? Probably not. I think they're going to be in real trouble this year.
Yeah, I really worry for Metz. And when you replace someone who got you a fair few goals and then you replace him with Nolan Roux, who will probably miss 4 or 5 before he manages to net 1 every so often, does streak of the panic button at least for you. Then they might have, like you say, budget restrictions might have really halted them from getting more. But if they could squeeze out some goals from Roux, then there's a real hope. And if they can reinvest that money, absolutely they can give it a good go with some of the teams around them. But yeah, I'm on the fence on Metz at the moment. I really worry about them. Let's move on to another side that have been promoted, the final side, and that's Strasbourg. And I've been very kindly lent some notes from our very own Peter Rutzler, who did an excellent article on them as well. He couldn't, unfortunately, be on the show live, but he's given me a very extensive rundown of the team and what they've done this preseason. And they've had a solid preseason they were undefeated up until the 2 games recently where they won 1 and drawn 1. But they've had a interesting couple of moments. Obviously, last season was a dramatic one from them, really, getting back from Ligue 2, having been in National the year before, having Thierry Lory, who's obviously been successful in Ligue 1 last couple of seasons ago with Gazlec Ajaccio. Yes, he didn't keep them up, but to even have stood a chance with that kind of club really showed how excellent he managed and got them really firing in January as well. And with a great support base as well at Strasbourg, that will really help them as well. They averaged 17,000 supporters in Ligue 2, which is nothing to shout about when the Ligue 1 average is 21,000. That's an absolute massive bonus, I think, for that kind of size of club, with having such a strong fan base and obviously such a strong history in French football, being one of the only 6 clubs to have won all 3 major trophies. That's not a bad thing to have on your CV, even if you have been up and down in recent seasons. But they've lost Khalid Boutaib, who's been in Ligue 1 before. He scored 20 times last season. He, like Peter has put here, is key to their promotion success. And although he's moved on, it was big money in Turkey. He's age 30, and we can't really blame him. And they've replaced him with Idris Saidi from Cardiff, who's never really impressed, although he had his moments. And he was decent on loan at Belgium, in Belgium last season, scoring 14 times for... I do not want to say that name because I will definitely butcher it. But
Kortrijk?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it does not look like that, but that at least you've helped me out on that one at least. But they brought Benjamin Cornet, who has great experience in Ligue 1. It's Saint-Etienne. He's a solid player, although it wasn't really great fit under Gaultier. Kenny Lala and Pablo Martinez from Lens. They're 2 decent players, and the real intriguing one for me is Binguru Kamara from Tours, who has been watched by a number of bigger clubs as well in Europe, full stop. And him being the number 1 choice this season will be really exciting, one of the youth keepers in France as well. And obviously bringing Jonas Martin back from his pretty terrible time, really, at Real Betis, former Montpellier man, getting him to add a little bit creativity into that midfield might really push them a little bit further than some of the other sides. But them investing really is a real positive. It's something that the the new president, Mark Keller's really emphasised of really investing in the squad and trying to build something that can sustain in Ligue 1. Whether that's the case, given the teams around them and the resources they have, is another question entirely. I do quite like how they've tried to build the squad. I think if Martin can return to the form that he had at Montpellier, which was decent, I think that's a really good signing. If they can get, my worry again is goals though. If they can't get enough goals out of Saidi, then they're really, really going to struggle. I think, even though they had a really positive season last season, there's a couple of worries about the squad. I don't know what you think, Eric. Are they good enough to stay up?
I don't think so, but I do like the signings they've made. Nuno da Costa from Valenciennes, another one I think has quite a bit of potential. He was really impressive down the back in the last season for the Swans. Dimitri Leonard had 11 assists last season. A lot of those were from dead balls, but I think that there is a lot of potential of this team. They'll probably play something looking at like a 4-3-1-2 with Cornier behind probably Saidi and Da Costa. I think that they could really be a dynamic, decent side to watch. I do question the defense, though. They're very old, looking at the likes of Kader Manjan, and they've lost Felipe Saad, and I just question whether there's enough quality in that back line for them to survive. They have got a couple of youngsters coming through, Kashi and Solvay, but it's looking dicey in that defense. So whether they've got enough defensively to stay up or not is another question. I have them going down for the time being.
I do worry a little bit about them. I'm happy that out of the three, they seem the most active, at least trying to build a side that might stay in Ligue 1 and then from then do something else. But yeah, you do have to worry about, again, another team moving up 2 divisions so quickly. It can be such a difficult jump to make, really. Moving on to Nice now, who had a terrific season last season. There's no doubt about that. And it's great to see them in the Champions League and fighting for that against Ajax on Wednesday. Let's hope they can continue that adventure. Adam, they've kept Seri, which is an absolute coup for the moment, at least, anyway, until someone ends up paying that 40 million euros they're asking for. If they can keep him, if they can continue with the interesting squad they showed against Ajax, where they were relatively decent, to be fair, in spells, can they still fight for Champions League football or Europe in total?
Yes, I think so. I'm not as down on Nice as perhaps others are. I think the main thing that for Nice this season going forward would be Lucien Favre. I mentioned a few times on the pod last season that I felt he was, as we all did, this one of the signings of the season. He's an unbelievably good manager and still an underrated manager as well. The fact that they were top at Christmas, and obviously that was a big thing for them, but they sort of fell away. But the fact that they were still in the title race, within the chance of winning the league with 2 or 3 games to go, when they played that PSG game and beaten 3-1, it just shows what a great manager what Lucien Favre is, and grinding results out and getting the best out of his players and really finding a formula that wins games. Such a nuanced tactician. I think, yes, they've lost a few players, and yes, it's going to be difficult for them trying to get into the Champions League. I don't know that they're going to overcome Ajax. They might end up in Europa League again. And, they handled that pretty well last year, to be honest, but they didn't really prioritise it. So I think the fact that Lucien Favre is still their manager and they haven't been completely gutted as it stands, I think that there's no reason why they can't be challenging for top 6 again this year. I'd expect them to be in there. But whether they are European places or not remains to be seen, obviously, because depending on who wins the cups. But I think they really, really can challenge those areas. I think another player that you haven't mentioned yet was Wellin Cyprian. Obviously, he got injured at the end of last year, hasn't moved on, obviously, because he continually injured at the moment. But when they get him back, and if they do manage to keep Seri, I think Pierre-Lise Malou is a good signing. And keep Balotelli. Hopefully, he can maintain some of the form he showed over the course of last year. Alassane Player was very, very good before he got injured too. He's on his way back. There's still a lot of positives there for them. So I really feel like that they're going to be a force to be reckoned with this year, and that Lucien Favre is very, very capable of getting the best out of that squad. And they'll no one will want to go to the Allianz Riviera, and no one will look forward to them coming to them either. They're a very, very good team still, and I think they'll represent Ligue 1 brilliantly once more.
Eric, do you think they've got enough to compete on 2 fronts, especially if they do manage to make the Champions League group stages?
Yeah, I think so. I really like the moves that Nice have made this summer. I think that Makengo and Tamez in particular are 2 really capable central midfielders that can add depth and sort of ameliorate. This is, again, conditionally on Seri staying. But I think I like those moves. I like the addition of Jalé as a right back. If they keep Dalbert as well, I think this is a very complete and very deep team. I currently have them in my top 3 coming into the season. I like them to finish 3rd again, with Monaco taking 2nd. Assuming the team stays the way it is. I fully agree with Adam, Lucien Favre, the way he managed to keep that team battling, even with the losses of Cyprien and Playa. He lost Seri for a month. He lost Ricardo Pereira for a month. He lost Younes Belanda for a month. The way he was able to consistently keep that team competing, keep a solid defense, bring along younger players, thinking the likes of Coziello. I know he had started under Claude Puel, but make him a more complete player in terms of being a box-to-box midfielder. Bring along Remy Walter, bring along Malang Sarr in particular. I think Nice are going to be perhaps not as solid defensively this season. Losing Paul Bice is a bit of a stumbling block, but I think they'll be a very impressive team that should be competing for the top 3 without question.
Yeah, and they'll be from that game on Wednesday night. They'll be really disappointed that they conceded that goal against Ajax, because they were the better team for a long time in that game and really allowed Ajax back into that game. And now on Wednesday, it's a tricky one to go to Amsterdam and get a result, but they've got the capability of doing it if they can hold off that young side who do have great attacking talent, but were really stuttered by Nice at the Allianz Riviera. It's an interesting one. I really do hope they can make the Champions League, and I'm super surprised Seri's still there. I can't believe someone's not paid that fee yet. But we'll move on to the final team of our Ligue and preview, and that's Rennes, who've had a really interesting window, really. They've bought Ismaili Sarr for, yes, a lot of money. They've bought Mawassa in as well. They've lost Castile. They've given away players that were frustrating, at least in CO and to an extent Said as well. What do you think, too, the improvements they've made this summer, Adam? We were really down about them at the very end of last season, but all of a sudden, a couple of little moves make them really intriguing again. Adam, can you hear me?
I don't know if he wants to come in, he can. But I really like the moves that Rennes have made. I mean, this is finally loosening those Puma purse strings. Rennes are owned by the same family that own Puma Sportswear, and bringing in the likes of Sarr, Mawassa, Bourigeaud, even Hamari Traore, who's a right back they brought in from Rennes, is an international. I like what they've done. I think that this they recognize that some of the talent they have on hand is going to put them in good stead, particularly the likes of Joris Nagnon and some of the players they brought in last winter, I think. But again, as you rightly mentioned, Castile, the loss of him is a real big deal. I know Rai Samboli is a player who has some international experience, but is he really at a level good enough to kick on, to be a starter for a team that's challenging for European play in Liga? I kind of have my doubts about that. They've also managed to hang on to Benjamin Andre, who's, I think, a really underrated player. Nourdin Moumbele as a striker, well, okay, I have my doubts about that too. But again, when have Rennes ever not, been a team that gives you worries in terms of their striking ability? So perhaps Rennes can take advantage of sort of the muddle that it looks to be below PSG and finish in a European spot. But I think that they should certainly be a little bit more attractive this season. They could be a little bit dull under Gourcuff last season, just because of the lack of quality in wide areas. I mean, let's face it, starting Romain Malfitano on the wing is not going to, Morgan Malfitano on the wing is not going to do anything to catch the eye. And I think that giving more chances to some of those younger players will put them in a better spot. So it remains to be seen, but I think overall a decent summer for Rennes and Sarr in particular, but also, Mawassa should get plenty of chances in the immediate future.
Yeah, and I'm delighted that Sarr stayed in the league. I know there's a fair few Mets fans that aren't particularly pleased that he's maybe made a smaller jump up than expected, but good money, good club for him to possibly grow this season as well, and Rennes at least doing something to give them some sort of momentum, having had a really poor end to 2017 season, at least anyway. That's all from us this week. My thanks to Eric, Adam, Peter, Samuel, and Robin for joining us in parts. Next week we will be live at our new recording time of 10 p.m. GMT, so put that on your schedule. And we want to hear some questions from you this season as well for a new viewers section we're doing planning as well. Send in your tweets to our handle at the GFFN show, or with hashtag the GFFN show, to ask us some questions in the future. But for now, a bientôt and goodbye.